When was the last time you actually looked forward to your own birthday? Be honest, there was a time when you did. When the day felt like it belonged to you. When you went to sleep the night before with that specific kind of excitement that only exists when you are small, and the world still feels like it might show up for you. And somewhere between that child counting down the days and the adult you are now, something closed. Not dramatically, just quietly. The way you stop reaching for something after you have missed it enough times. Now your birthday is coming up, and you say you hate it. You think celebrating this day is pointless. Or worse, you feel something you do not want to look at too closely. So you say it is just another day and you move on. You are not cold. You are not broken or ungrateful or difficult. You have every right to feel this way, to treat your birthday like any other day. But have you ever wondered why your mind works so differently from that of other people who love to celebrate their birthdays? This video is about why that happens, and it starts much earlier than your birthday. Think about what birthdays looked like when you were small, not the ideal version, the real one. Maybe your family was the kind where the day got forgotten, not out of cruelty. Life was busy, money was tight, there was always something more pressing, something louder than you. The day would arrive and someone might remember in the afternoon, or not at all, and you would sit with that specific feeling of a day that was supposed to mean something and did not. You would not cry about it. You would tell yourself you were fine. It was just a day. And you would believe that, almost. Or maybe your family did celebrate. There was cake, there were candles, people sang the song. But something was always slightly off. The attention felt uncomfortable, like everyone was performing something they had agreed to without quite feeling it. Or the day would start well and collapse somewhere in the middle, because in some houses, no day ever really held its shape. Someone said the wrong thing. Someone was in a bad mood. The thing that was supposed to be yours got interrupted by something that had nothing to do with you, and you sat there at the table, recalibrating quietly, the way you had learned to do. Some of you grew up in homes where the emotional air was always taken up by something else. A parent carrying weight they never put down. Tension between adults that you learned to read before you could read words. A house where everyone's feelings were present except yours, not because yours were forbidden, but because there was simply no room left. You learned to minimize yourself without being asked, to take up less space, to check how everyone else was doing before you thought about how you were doing. In that kind of home, a birthday is not a simple thing. It is the one day a year where your need to be seen, to be the center of something good, to matter in a way that is visible and uncomplicated, is completely exposed. It is the day when the distance between what you needed and what your home was able to give you was impossible to look away from. So you did what children do when something hurts too consistently. You stopped expecting it. You stopped building the day up in your mind the week before. You stopped telling people how excited you were. You stopped listening for evidence that anyone had planned something. You learned to arrive at your own birthday already prepared for less, already braced, already a little gone from the inside, so that whatever arrived could not reach the part of you that still cared. John Bowlby, who spent decades studying how children learn to love and be loved, found something in his research that sounds simple, but changes everything once you see it. When a child reaches toward someone, toward a parent, toward a caregiver, and is met with nothing, with silence, with distraction, with a mood that says, "Not now," the child does not conclude that the adult was unavailable. The child concludes that the reaching was the problem. And so the child stops reaching. Not because the wanting disappears, because wanting, shown openly, became something they learned to associate with a very particular kind of pain. The pain of needing and not being met, of hoping and being left with the hope still in your hands. That is what happened to the part of you that used to love your birthday. You did not become someone who does not need. You became someone who learned to hide that they need, and hiding it, over enough time, started to feel like not needing at all. By the time you were a teenager, the shift was almost complete. You were the one who said birthdays were stupid, who said you did not want anything, who laughed it off when people asked, who felt underneath the laugh something older and quieter that you had learned not to examine. Now think about something specific, because this is where it gets more precise. Heinz Kohut, a psychoanalyst who spent his career studying how the self develops in early childhood, identified something he called mirroring. The idea is not complicated. A child needs to be seen by someone who matters to them. Not just noticed, seen, celebrated for existing, reflected back by a parent who communicates, without necessarily using words, that this child is valuable, that this child's excitement is real and worth responding to, that this child deserves to take up space and be delighted in. That mirroring is not a luxury item. It is how a person learns, at the most foundational level, that they are worth celebrating. It is the experience that builds the internal sense of I matter, and when that mirroring is inconsistent, when the warmth is there some days and gone others, when the parent is present physically but somewhere else emotionally, when the attention comes, but always feels like it might be taken back, the child does not build that internal sense. They build something else instead. A quiet, persistent suspicion that attention is temporary, that being seen is not a given, but a loan, that the safest position is to not need it, because needing it and not receiving it is the worst feeling there is. Your birthday became the one day a year that proved it, over and over again, and eventually you stopped letting it prove anything. You got there first. You made yourself smaller than the day before the day could make you feel small. This is what most people do not understand when they look at someone who brushes off their birthday. They see someone low maintenance, easygoing, mature even, and the person lets them see that, because explaining what is actually happening would require words for something that was learned before words existed. Now think about the homes where love was present but unpredictable, because not every difficult childhood is a story of absence. Some of you had parents who loved you, who were warm sometimes, distant others, who made some birthdays genuinely good and missed others in ways you could not predict and could not explain. The love was real. It just never felt like solid ground. That particular inconsistency is its own kind of wound, because the child who grows up with consistent absence eventually adjusts. They calibrate to what is there. But the child who grows up with inconsistent presence never fully adjusts. They spend their childhood in a state of low-grade waiting, hoping, bracing, hoping again, watching for signs, trying to figure out which version of the day, which version of the parent, which version of the love is going to arrive. Donald Winnicott, a pediatrician and psychoanalyst who observed thousands of children over his career, described how children who cannot rely on consistent emotional availability from the people who care for them learn to construct a version of themselves that can manage the inconsistency. A self that does not ask for things that might not come. A self that can absorb disappointment without showing it. A self that has made itself easier than the real thing underneath, more agreeable, less demanding, safer for the room it lives in. He called this the false self, not a lie, an adaptation, one so thorough and so practiced that the person wearing it eventually loses the easy thread back to what they actually feel. On your birthday, the false self runs the day. It smiles and says it's fine. It is appropriately grateful for whatever arrives. It does not let on when the day turns out to be smaller than it could have been, and somewhere further in, the real self watches and says nothing, because the real self learned that saying something does not help, that wanting something out loud is not safe, that hope on this particular day costs more than you have decided to spend. Now bring this into your actual life, the one you are living right now. When your birthday comes up in conversation, what do you do with your face? You probably do something automatic, something you have done so many times it is invisible to you now. You minimize it. You say you are not really into celebrating. You change the subject before it gets too specific. When someone asks what you want, you say nothing, or something small and easy, something that costs nothing to give and therefore costs nothing if it does not arrive. When the day actually comes, you are already in a mode that people who love you describe as calm, and you, privately, would describe as somewhere else. And then the day ends, and something in you exhales, not from satisfaction, from relief, because the moment of maximum exposure is over. You have people in your life who love you, maybe a partner who wants to make it special, friends who message you, family who means well. And you feel something when they do, something genuine. And you also, underneath the genuine thing, feel the familiar pressure, the discomfort of being in the center, the wish that they would not make it quite such a thing. And you do not know how to explain that without sounding strange, so you do not explain it. You just manage it, the way you have always managed it. Being celebrated asks something specific of you. It asks you to receive, to be still while someone points their full attention at you and says, "You matter, this day matters, you deserve to be made a fuss of." For someone who spent years learning that they did not, that receiving is one of the hardest things there is. It does not feel like love landing safely. It feels like standing in a room with no exits, like being caught without the armor that has become so familiar, you sometimes forget you are wearing it. Kohut observed something directly relevant here. People who did not receive consistent mirroring in childhood often develop a complicated and contradictory relationship with positive attention as adults. They want recognition and are destabilized by it simultaneously. They hunger for being seen and then feel something close to panic when someone actually looks, because their nervous system was trained, in the earliest years, to understand attention as conditional, and conditional attention teaches you something very specific. When someone looks at you warmly, wait. Because the warmth is going to be followed by something. A requirement, a withdrawal, a version of love with terms you have not been shown yet. So you manage the warmth before it can manage you. You minimize the day. You deflect the attention back towards someone else. You say it is not a big deal. Because letting it be a big deal means letting it mean something. And letting it mean something means risking what happens when it does not live up to what it means. There is a particular exhaustion in all of this that people who love you cannot see. It is not physical. It is the exhaustion of managing your own feelings about a day, while simultaneously managing the feelings of everyone around you who wants you to feel good about it. Of reassuring people that you are fine when they notice you seem distant. Of being grateful enough to satisfy the people who love you, while not being so openly moved that you have to account for why. That management started very early, and it has cost something, every single year, without you ever quite adding it up. There is one more thing about this that does not get talked about, and it has to do not with childhood, but with time. Irvin Yalom, a psychiatrist who spent decades working with people on the most difficult questions of human existence, wrote about what he called awakening experiences. Moments that crack the ordinary surface of life and force a person to reckon with the fact that they are moving through time in one direction only. That the future they imagined for themselves is either arriving or it is not. That the inventory is real, even when they avoid taking it. Birthdays are awakening experiences. They are, structurally, an annual audit. The number changes and the mind does the accounting almost involuntarily. How old am I? Where did I think I would be by now? What has changed and what has not changed and what may never change? Who am I still waiting to become? For most people, this is uncomfortable but manageable. For someone who spent their childhood managing their family's emotional world instead of building their own, who has spent their adult years still running the same programs they installed as a child, still making themselves smaller, still more comfortable taking care of others than allowing others to take care of them. That accounting is something else entirely. The birthday arrives and the number changes, and something in you asks, very quietly, is this what I meant for this to look like? And if the answer opens something you cannot easily close, the simplest response is to not look, to make the day ordinary by force of will, to move through it as quickly as possible, without ceremony, without the particular quality of stillness that would allow you to actually feel it. So when you say it is just another day, sometimes that is what you have made it, but it was not supposed to be nothing, and some part of you, very quietly, knows that. Carl Jung called the process of becoming who you actually are individuation, the long, often painful work of separating yourself from the roles and adaptations you built in order to survive the place you came from, of finding out what is actually yours, underneath the management, underneath the performance, underneath the careful distance you learn to keep from your own needs. For someone who hates their birthday, that work often starts here. Not with therapy necessarily, not with a decision to change. It starts with noticing, with catching the specific quality of feeling that arrives with the day and recognizing it for what might be the first time as something other than indifference. Because indifference and protection are not the same thing. Indifference has no history. Protection knows exactly where it came from. What you have been calling not caring about your birthday is protecting yourself from a very specific kind of disappointment. The kind that has your name on it. The kind that arrives once a year and asks you to hope and has, enough times, left you holding that hope with nowhere to put it. That is not a character flaw. That is a reasonable response to an unreasonable amount of practice in being let down. The person who learned to read every room they walked into became someone with a quality of attention that most people never develop. You notice things. You feel things in spaces before they are named out loud. You know when someone is struggling before they say so. You remember what matters to the people around you. You show up for other people's days in ways that you have never allowed anyone to show up for yours. That is not nothing. That is not a consolation prize. The child who had to pay such close attention to the feelings of everyone around them, who had to become fluent in other people's emotional weather in order to navigate their own home safely, that child became an adult with a kind of empathy that runs deeper than most people's, an ability to sit with pain without flinching, an understanding of what it costs to be unseen because they know it from the inside. That understanding is something you carry. It makes you the person other people call when things are hard, the person who does not need things to be simple in order to stay, the person whose presence is felt because it is genuinely given. You just forgot to give any of it to yourself. And your birthday is the clearest signal of that. The one day a year when everything points back at you and asks, "What about you?" And you, very skillfully, very quietly, point it back somewhere else. Here is what beginning to change this actually looks like, not in theory, in real, small, specific terms. It does not look like throwing yourself a party. It does not look like suddenly loving the attention. It looks like pausing, this year, just for a moment, before the deflection. Before the "it's fine" and the "just another day." It looks like sitting with the question of what you would actually want, if wanting were allowed. Not what is easy to give. What you would actually want. It looks like letting someone do something small for you without immediately minimizing it, without saying you did not have to, or it is too much, without finding a way to give the attention back before it can fully land. It looks like recognizing, when the dread arrives with the date, that the dread is information, that it is pointing at something real, that the child who stopped counting down the days did not stop because birthdays are unimportant. They stopped because wanting, openly, on that specific day, had cost them something they decided they could not keep paying. And recognizing that is not the same as healing it, but it is the beginning of being honest about what is actually there, which is the only place anything ever actually begins.